Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Marshall webinar. We will begin our conversation shortly. Welcome to today's Marshall webinar, Strategy and Risk Management in Commercial Real Estate, the Future of the Office. After the discussion, there will be around 30 minutes for Q&A. If you would like to pose a question, you may do so by clicking on the Q&A button in Zoom. So to introduce the webinar, I would first like to hand over to our Associate Professor teaching Risk Management and running the Undergraduate Risk Management Program, Kristen Jaconi.
Thank you, Sujin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are fortunate today to have one of the most thoughtful and cutting-edge minds in real estate join us, Lew Horne. Lew heads the Pacific Southwest Division for CBRE, overseeing Southern California, Hawaii, and Arizona. He also is an active member of the business community. He currently serves as a board member of LA Business Council, as well as World Trade Corporation Los Angeles, and he's the past chair of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. He also is passionate about challenges facing Los Angeles and the greater Los Angeles community, such as homelessness. He's the co-chair of the Homeless Initiative for the Central City Association. Lew also serves as a board member of Catholic Big Brothers and Big Sisters. He is a USC alumnus, a passionate supporter of USC Marshall. He's married to a USC alumna, and he has two daughters who've attended USC also. And I just learned recently that his wife and her 6 sisters all went to USC and married USC alumni. So welcome, Lew.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yep, it's great to have you. So Lew, I thought we'd start first level set with our audience about how the greater Los Angeles office market looks right now. And CBRE issued its Q3 2020 report on the greater Los Angeles office a couple of weeks ago in October. And the report noted that the current office space vacancy rate had climbed to 15%. And that's a 46% increase year over year if you're comparing it to Q3 2019. It also looks like vacant sublease space rose by over 50%. And a lot of the transactions in that quarter were really shorter term, not longer term. So there is some skepticism about the market. It'd be great if you could give us some more detail on Los Angeles. Also the different regions, how East Downtown is faring versus West Los Angeles.
Sure. Thank you, Kristen. And I appreciate you inviting me to the program. First of all, it's all about, in terms of the office market this year, it's all about COVID. What we've seen more than anything is we had a very healthy office marketplace, particularly in West LA, South Bay, and even in downtown Los Angeles, for the last several years. But what we saw with the impact of COVID was just striking. We were impacted by retailers, then by hospitality, and then just over the last 6 or 7 months now, it's really been all about COVID. And that's impacted not just the leasing market, but it's also impacted the capital markets and also the financing markets. It's primarily because there's been this new relationship with the employer and the employee because of the mandates issued by the federal and state and county governments around staying at home. So we've seen a massive, generally there's about a third of the marketplace in the office area that renews. We've seen almost a 60% area now of clients that are actually renewing, but renewing in short term because they really don't know what this new work from home strategy is going to look like and how it will long-term impact the market. They also don't know what the market ultimately is going to look like relative to the impact of a new work from home or work from anywhere kind of an activity that companies might embrace after COVID. So in a situation where there's this kind of uncertainty, generally you're going to have a pause. And so what we're seeing is a lot of short-term renewal in virtually all of the markets. And I think I can speak for all of the markets across the country. Short-term renewal. Clients don't know what to build, and they don't know what they don't know if they need more space or they don't know if they need less. They may need more because of more social distancing. They may need less because a larger percentage of those employers may be working from home. So because of this uncertainty, it's really created this pause. And it's really created a situation where clients are now just kicking the can down the road by doing a 1 year or 2 year, max a 3 year renewal, except for in certain cluster circumstances where, for example, there's been larger deals done in West LA with some of the content developers. But for the most part, right now, there's a pause. And that's also impacted the capital markets. When there's no certainty relative to occupancy, or there's no certainty relative to rent growth, you're going to have a pause. The institutions won't move into the space until they see more certainty in those areas.
Right. And you mentioned West Los Angeles and the content companies. So is downtown East Los Angeles, that's just not faring as well as other areas?
Well, I would say it's, first of all, it's difficult to measure, because right now we in most cases, there's this essential versus non-essential worker that's been defined by the state. And in some cases, there's some confusion or conflict with the county. It's really not the city's jurisdiction as much. It really is, we're leaning on the metrics that are coming out of the health department and really through the county. And in some cases, there's some ambiguity there. So it's challenging or difficult. Companies don't know what the extent of their liability is, and they certainly want to focus on the health and well-being of their employees. So because of that uncertainty, we're just not seeing a lot of people coming back. I would say that overall in the downtown market, there's maybe a 15% occupancy in that space right now. West LA, one might see a little bit more, but for the most part, even when companies are reopening, what's happening is those employees will come in a limited format back to the office and realize, well, not everybody's here. Or the staff member that I need to help me prepare my document or prepare my presentation isn't there. They're still working from home. So it's not the same. So I think we're all going to be waiting for that vaccine. We're really waiting for more certainty before everybody starts to return back to the office. That said, I do think that there's going to be this newfound muscle of the employer-employee relationship, where there's this new trusted relationship where it actually has worked. It has worked. And so people are productive at home. They do like it in a lot of cases. Now, I don't think there's all this discussion about, that we won't need office buildings anymore. I don't think that's accurate at all. In fact, more, I think, going forward than ever, an office building is where you create culture. It's where your new employee or your mid-level emerging leader are tutored and mentored, and they learn from those that are more senior. You can't build a culture on Zoom. So I think you're going to see a difference in the way that people occupy space and the way that employers actually build out certain amenities that attract and retain great talent. But I think for the most part, until we see that vaccine, until we see the state and the county laws in alignment, I think you're going to see a very light occupancy in most cases.
Yeah, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about other areas. So what about the other large areas like New York, San Francisco, and some of the secondary markets? And then in Asia, where they seem to have controlled COVID even without a vaccine, what are you seeing there, commercial real estate wise, office space wise?
It's a great question, because each market is different. In marketplaces where, in LA, for example, we've got the benefit of a lousy mass transit system. And I say that jokingly, because in New York, where you need a subway to get to your office, which 60-70% of the commuters are going in through a subway system or mass transit, employees are just not getting on those subways. They just don't feel safe. And New York early on in this pandemic was impacted more than other markets in the country. So there's a real fear of getting onto that. Same thing in San Francisco, same thing in Boston. So in marketplaces where they have elevated and more sophisticated mass transit, they've been impacted in a disproportionate share than in areas where there's not the mass transit systems. And so in those marketplaces, they're concerned about employees getting to the building. Then there's two other choke points in the building. The first choke point is the elevator. How do you put, you've got a building with 1 million people in it. How do you get people up and down that elevator 4 at a time. Because what will happen is as soon as everyone comes back and there's a line around the block, you're just not going to wait in that line. So we've got to figure out that, and that's where that vaccine is going to be so critical. The other choke point is in the valet. In most, like in downtown Los Angeles, for example, a lot of the buildings are parked at one car per 1,000 employee, which means you need a valet to stack the cars so that you can get the right right number of people in the buildings. So there's solutions that are coming out now very creatively, where there's the cleansing of the car, there's plastic around the seat, plastic around the steering wheel, but there's several touch points in that car where people are going to be concerned. So I think, so that's the US. I think in Asia's different. Asia did get back much faster. In fact, in a lot of cases in Asia, it's almost back to normal. And part of that is because I think they have a broader based medical system where there's generally medical available for all. I also think you've got a disciplined population where they've seen this movie before. There was SARS, there were other pandemics where they were used to the discipline of wearing a mask and keeping distance from other citizens. And then there's also contact tracing. There's these muscles that have been developed in Asia, which we've just never dealt with before. So I think, listen, I don't think this will be the last pandemic we have, and I think we're going to be much more prepared for the next one, and not, in some cases, fighting. I went to we have a cabin up at Shaver Lake, and I went up there and I went into one of the sports stores up there, and I had my mask on, and the woman behind the counter said, "This is America, take your mask off." I mean, it was such an odd response, but there's this funny reaction by some people about the discipline of wearing a mask or keeping a social distance. So I think in other parts of the world, like Asia, they've just become a lot more disciplined because they've seen the movie before.
Okay, no, thank you. There are some bright spots. You mentioned West Los Angeles and some of our content developers. Do you foresee that the content developers are really going to be driving the significant transactions in Southern California area going?
Well, in 2019, it was the year of the content developer. And it was interesting in a lot of places around. I have 5 counterparts that run the company across the country. And I'd mentioned content, and in a lot of cases, they didn't know what I was talking about. So LA, and particularly West LA and parts of the Valley, and we're starting to see a few companies take an interest in downtown and in the South Bay. We really are state and main at a global level for content creation and development. And that's for gaming, it's for television, it's for the big screen as well as the smaller screen on your social media devices. So this is really where companies that have not been in the space are now moving into the space, big companies. And we all know who they are, Apples and Googles and these larger Amazons that are coming into the space. And they've been in the space, but they really are now coming into the LA area in a big way because they need that talent. So it's not about the physical space in most cases. It's about a company's ability to attract and retain talent. And so you'll notice that areas are not, people don't come here for the sunshine. They come here because there's 1 million students in class every day, and they're graduating every year, and there's an abundance of talented professionals that are there. It's the same thing in Boston. Boston's the life science capital of the country right now because you've got schools that are feeding that ecosystem. Same thing in San Francisco, and the same thing in San Diego on the life science sector. But if you go to a tech vertical, it's going to be San Francisco, it's going to be parts of LA, it's certainly going to be, the general Bay Area. I think, so there's clusters, and these businesses are moving to these clusters because they need to access those kinds of employees. You're not gonna look at, when you look at the wide range of the cost of real estate facilities, it's dramatic, and it can be dramatic, frankly, in a 10-mile radius. Even in Los Angeles, the difference in pricing between West LA or Santa Monica versus Burbank, it's a dramatic difference. And primarily because those employers are focusing on that employee. And it's very important that not only are they in that right location, but they're building facilities that are going to be interesting, that are going to attract the right employee that's going to give them a competitive advantage in the marketplace.
Okay, great. Why don't we switch over to talking about remote work from home, and as you said, work from anywhere. So we have WFH, and now we have WFA.
Yeah.
So even before COVID, according to Global Workforce Analytics, 5 million individuals in the United States were work from home, and those don't include the self-employed. And the growth in work from home since I think about 2005, it's been over 170% through 2018. Clearly, as you mentioned, a lot of people like working from home. Some don't, and we've actually heard from some of our major CEOs. Jamie Dimon has commented that he prefers people in the workplace. I think that little issue you were talking about, they've seen some productivity declines at JP Morgan, I think you've seen Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix, be pretty blunt with a journal reporter calling remote work a pure negative. I've seen others seem to embrace it. So Mark Zuckerberg predicts that 50% of his workforce at Facebook will be working from home in 5 to 10 years. And BlackRock CEO think he has commented that he thinks 80 to 70% of his workforce will be in perhaps on a rotational basis. So if we take Mark Zuckerberg or Larry Fink's comments about remote work and that there will be a significant number of employees working from home, how do you think that will impact the office space market?
Well, your question is very timely because we've been thought leaders in that space. 8 years ago, we opened up the space that's behind me, which is in downtown Los Angeles. And I know we'll get to that question later, but in my view, all of them are right. I think that part of it is we've been successful. It was interesting when we first entered into this pandemic, there was a feeling that, oh my gosh, office buildings are going to go away. Everybody loves working at home. I'm going to save 2 hours on a commute, and I can spend more time with my kids, and I can walk the dog and at the same time be just as productive because I'm capturing. But part of that was because we're all in the same boat. Nobody's going to a movie. Nobody's going out to eat. And we've also been drafting off of the cultures that companies have created for the last 20 years. Where there's also a hierarchy within the company of, the senior people that are, in a lot of cases, the rainmakers or the developers or the leaders of those organizations. And then you've got the mids that are growing into those senior positions and the juniors that are entry level. What's really happened in the last quarter of looking back on this pandemic is people really they want to get back into the office. They want to get back into that culture. They're missing the serendipity of kind of bump space. We've designed our space around the world over the last 8 years around creating places where people bump into each other in a serendipitous moment where we can actually exchange ideas and become a better company. I think, Facebook and JP Morgan and Netflix, they're all right. But I think what's going to happen is the employee is going to demand flexibility or want flexibility. And as employers, we're all competing for great employees. We want to retain the best and we want to recruit the best. So if I've got a beautiful space like the space behind me, other spaces that we've created, and I'm competing for that really high quality employee with one of my good competitors, and they're going to talk about a work from home strategy, or they're going to talk about space that's dry or boring, I think I've got a competitive advantage for that employee. And there's no difference between my business or the media business or the financial services business or the law firm business. They're all competing for that great employee. The real estate cost is the second line item generally on that income statement for a company. And here's the way it kind of works. In fact, it's interesting. I think many on the call probably understand LEED, which is energy savings. If you look at LEED in LA, it's around $3 a foot savings on an annual basis. If you look at rent, it's probably anywhere from $40 to $50, depending. If you're in West LA, it can be $75, $80 in some areas. Employees, $600 to $800 a foot. It's all about the employee. So the quality of the space that I create to attract a higher level of employee, or what I put into that space, wellness components to make it safer, in educational components to make it more interesting, design elements to make it so that you're proud of your space. All of those, I think, are going to be critical. So I do believe, though, that pre-pandemic, there was a lot of controversy around work from home. We all remember the CEO of Yahoo basically said, we're not going to do it anymore because nobody's working. That's changed. I think at this stage, people are productive. They do like working from home. I don't think people, though, generally at the senior, mid, or junior level want to stay working at home without the benefits of their own culture. It's the old, the great play that was just on. You want to be in the room where the decisions are made. You want to be part of those that are ahead of you so that you can learn from. And so culture is that difficult thing to measure, but that critical part of an organization. And you cannot build culture on Zoom. You've got to have an environment. Now, I do think there's other elements that are now moving into the workspace, and we're studying those as we speak on how we incorporate that into our own workplace strategy, which is co-working. The co-working parts of, with the advent of WeWork and cross-campus and Regis and Spaces and our offering, which is HANA, all of that will play a role, I believe, in terms of companies' ability to flex up or to flex down. So I think there's going to be a combination of work from home. I think there's going to be a combination of co-working and flex space. And then there's going to absolutely be those long-term commitments to space with landlords so that you can build that culture, identify yourself and your brand with design, and then program those workplaces so that you're an attractive employee to an employee.
Okay, let's take, you talked about design a few times, and I think CBRE and you in particular have been very forward thinking in designing the office space to attract and retain employees. And we see the beautiful office behind you, that your Los Angeles office space. And you redesigned that a few years ago, so right, significantly before COVID-19. So what did you do? What was your thinking? What prompted you to do this at that time? And then what are some of the specific design concepts that you used and tools? And have you seen employee productivity increase? And have you been able to instill the culture that you envisioned?
Great question. So about 10 years ago, we started really looking into this, and I personally got very engaged with my colleagues. Andy Ratner, we worked at that time with Gensler, they were phenomenal in terms of the design piece. And we really studied, originally, what kind of environment could we build to attract and retain great employees, but also we're in this business. So we wanted to build a case study where we could say to a client, we're eating our own cooking here. We're not just telling you what to do and how to do it, but we're also showing you what we've done so that we can also demonstrate our own experiences on areas where we were successful and also areas where we may have missed. In the case of the downtown story, downtown 400 South Pope was the space that you see behind us, was really used as a place to store books and to store goods. There was also they kept a lot of the building owner at the time kept all their air conditioning equipment up here. And what we saw was the opportunity, if we could, and the reasons for that was because it's got a massively transparent roof line, so it would really get really hot. So we had to figure out how to keep it cool. We did, and then we figured out a way where we could, invest so that we were the first well-certified building. There were 50 physical components that went into the space that made it the first well-certified building in the world. Cork substrates under the floors, which make it easier for your posture. Sit-stand desks, biophilia, carbon filtration on the air, water coolers that were every 10 feet. There were a bunch of different things that we did to make it healthier for our employees. There was really no way for us to measure the health because you've got, there's just certain restrictions around that. But what we did do is we took surveys and people were happier. They were much happier. So that was a big win. We also programmed it so that we digitized everybody's space and we eliminated paper, or not eliminated, but we reduced paper. We blew out all of the file cabinets and we converted everybody to a digital format, and then said that, like your classroom, Kristen, at SC, we made it so that you can sit anywhere you want based on the work that you have to do for that day. So if you needed privacy, you could go to an office. If you needed to just do open outside work and you wanted to collaborate with colleagues, you could do that. If you wanted, more of a focus room where you wanted small groups or teams, you could do that. We infused it with technology. We infused it with better ways for collaboration, for creating an environment where people wanted to be in the office. And we're studying even better ways to do that now post-COVID. So we created that. And we did some fun stuff. When you take away ownership of the real estate of an office, it becomes, you got to be careful. It may start to look like a hospital. So we incorporated street artists to come in and actually help us with what we called at the time graffiti design, but it was really more designs on the local architects or local artists. And then we did that 85 times around the world. In the last 8 years, we've done this virtually in every major marketplace in the world. And we've created a culture for CV that really can then go to a client and say, take a look at what we've done. Now, by the way, we're in the process of completely refreshing this idea right now as we speak. We've got committees, we've got our workplace development team, we've got our own design components. We've got a lot of people that are really focusing right now on what's the next new, because we believe that there are going to be changes, subtle to what we've done, but material changes post-COVID. So.
Oh, great.
But if you notice, for example, in the back of me, that we have it looks a little bit more like a restaurant or a hotel lobby than it does an office space. That was by design. We wanted people running into each other. I've got 14 different divisions in this office. So when they come into the office, I want them having coffee together. I want them bumping into each other. I want them sharing their perspectives and, frankly, having better insight to client challenges. Because overall, it's not that we're creating a cheaper solution. People thought we were doing it because we could save money. It ended up costing us more money. But I've got a space where our people are more informed. They're more collaborative. They're more mobile. So.
No, again, it looks beautiful. You mentioned previously flex space as part of the future of the office market. And CBRE last year issued a report predicting by 2030 that I think 13% of office space would be flex space. And you yourself have said it's changed the market and we don't see that going away. So we have a lot of players here. WeWork, Notel, Convene Regus, and then even some of our larger landlords like Tishman Speyer are in that space. And as you mentioned, CBRE has an offering, HANA, in that space. Is your view still that flexible office space is part of the future?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's something that's not going away. I think it gets stronger. There's been a lot of noise around WeWork. WeWork made it cool. I mean, WeWork was an early entry into that space, and they went big. And actually, it is the dominant player. Was the dominant player. Still is the dominant player in the space. And although there were some mistakes that were made, I think there's no question that tenants like some level of flexibility. And there are what WeWork or anybody in the co-working business would tell you is that there's enterprise value. So an enterprise, a large company, and there are most actually, that may have short-term projects where they don't need to make a massive commitment to a 10-year lease or to a multi-million-dollar CapEx commitment, but they can actually move in, rent by the desk, go for 2 years, and then move out. I also think that you're going to start to see more and more where, when a company invests in a lease, they're making a 10-year commitment generally at a minimum with options after that. So it really means that generally I don't have quite enough or I have a little too much. So there's the margin. Now I want my own space. We're always going to have our own space. I want to be able to create, an environment where I can also, I've got technologies or I've got presentation ideas or different things that are going to give me a competitive advantage in working with our clients. But at the same time, I'd love the idea of being able to flex to get bigger or to smaller, depending on projects or short-term experiences. So the big issue around flex is typically I only need to commit for a month or a year or 2 years. I generally am not putting out a lot of CapEx dollars. So I think what's going to happen, like work from home or work from anywhere, it'll be on the margin. There'll be a portion of your strategy that will be committed to flex. I think one of the things that we're doing with HANA is we're offering that as a management contract for landlords. So I think that having some sort of a flex condition on every building or most buildings, so that tenants can move up or move down based on an offering, I think that's probably a potential that we're going to see going forward. So yeah, I don't know exactly what the percentage is going to be, just like I don't know what the percentage is going to be on work from home or work from anywhere, but it's not going away. And I think for the most part, co-working, or not so much co-working, let's call it flex working. Flex working, I think, is here to stay in some format.
Okay. And it's interesting with the different players, there are different business models. So for instance, you have the WeWork model where WeWork is entering into long-term leases with the landlords and then enhancing the space and subleasing. You have the TOG model, the office group in the UK. I think they're expanding into Germany. Blackstone took a big investment in them recently. They're trying to own the properties themselves, enhance them and lease them. And then you have the CBRE model, which is working with the landlords or the tenants, right? And enhancing the space. Is your view that all three models are sustainable?
I think the industry's new. I mean, some level of co-working has been around for a long, long time. I mean, there was Fijian way back in the early 80s. And then there was, the Regis organization who's been way out there in spaces. And there's been an evolution of this industry. But I think today, and frankly, the same thing with working from home or working from anywhere, the technology is caught up to the needs and people are comfortable with it. And employers, I think, in this pandemic have become a little bit more comfortable with certain groups working from home in a limited way. So a part of this is just, I think, the evolution of technology. And I think what happens is that, like, for example, in the retail space and in the office space, this pandemic, I think, has accelerated things that were already happening anyway. We see that in retail for sure. There were certain things that you better have, if you're a retailer, you'd better have an experience opportunity there. You better be offering something more than just selling tennis rackets or you're out of business. If you've got a place where people want to be, they want to recreate there, they want to socialize there, they want to go to a movie, get a bite to eat, spend 3 or 4 moments with their wallet on that site, that's something that's probably going to be a successful site. Same thing with office. I think that, co-working has been around for a long time. Working from home has been around a long time. But I think now that we've been forced to do it at this level and this capacity, I think it's just more accepted. So I tell my team all the time, it takes 30 days to develop any habit. You try a year of working from home. I mean, people are going to want some flexibility. Now, does that mean 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days? I don't know. But I think it may mean something. It's an interesting kind of experiment that we're going through in one of the large offices that I oversee right now. I won't mention which, but what's happening is the senior people, the higher production people are all back in the office. It's not in California, but they're all back in the office. And a lot of the mids and the juniors are basically still at home. But what's happening now is there's a bit of a FOMO thing going on, right? Where their fear of missing out is saying, whoa, I got to get with that senior team. I've got to understand what's happening. I missed that serendipity, and that's pulling people back into the office. So I think there's going to be more of this natural experimentation where people are getting used to this. But I think ultimately there's going to be just the importance of hey, listen, there's also the other element that we've seen in a lot of this adaptive reuse stuff. We a couple of years ago, we worked with Rick Caruso, and we created this an office out of an old Masonic temple. Mm-hmm. People love it. They love it. It feels like a cathedral. It's just got this beautiful woodwork, and it's just, the design part is exceptional. And then we've offered other services that are making it very attractive for people to want to go to work there. Now I think that's more important than ever. But I think this evolution's been taking place. I think it's just accelerated because of the COVID situation.
Okay. You mentioned retail. So even though the webinar is focused on the office, I think we can't not talk about the malls. So we're seeing malls converted into a variety of uses. We've seen Mace Rich, one of our largest mall operators, partner with Industrious to occupy to enhance for flex space the former spaces of department stores that have left the mall. We've also seen Westside Pavilion. I'm sure some of our listeners have either dined or shopped at Westside Pavilion. Google has entered into a 14-year lease with Macerich and Hudson Pacific Properties to convert, I think, nearly 600,000 square feet into office space there. We've also seen reports in the news about Amazon speaking with one of our large mall operators about using anchor tenant stores that are no longer occupied for its fulfillment centers. We've also heard about malls being converted to apartment complexes, medical offices, healthcare clinics, and even homeless shelters. So what are your views on the mall? Is it going to be just converted into a variety of uses? And then maybe first give us a few details on the Westside Pavilion transaction, because I know we have a lot of interested listeners.
Well, the Westside, it's a classic. Victor Coleman over at Hudson Pacific was the developer that did that deal, and candidly, that now just made that area more valuable. When you've got a user like Google that goes into an area like that, again, it just attracts other tech support and ancillary businesses. It improves the restaurants, it improves all of the retail around there. So I think this whole idea, and that's what I mentioned earlier about adaptive reuse. I mean, to be able to go into creative and interesting spaces and then do something interesting inside. Google also did the Spruce Goose a couple of years ago, which is beautiful, fascinating inside. So I think that's just part of that attract and retain strategy. Right location, right developer, right amenities, right access to the kind of employee that I'm attracted to. Your other question was around the there was the Google question, and the other question was around the adapt.
Yeah, the different uses, or the different uses will we see malls being converted to apartments?
So the DNA of a building, of an office building or a retail building, more important so in retail, there's something called a merchandising plan. And a merchandising plan means that you've got to bring tenants together that the sum equal greater than the sum of the parts. I mean, you've got to, if I've got it's kind of the classic on the closed mall was if you got the two anchors first and you could fill in the inline stores because people would go to the anchors. But now what's happening is that these are all curated. One store makes a difference to who that customer is. And so you need this combination of like stores that are going to offer enough variety or interest or entertainment or experience that is going to be attractive in the greater part of it. I think that the mall, for the open area, you see what Rick's done, Caruso's done with trains and fountains and outside eating, and he's created this synergy that it makes it really interesting. With the indoor mall, I think you got to be a little more careful in that, like I don't see a homeless shelter, and I'm the biggest proponent of homeless shelters, but you got to remember who your customer is, and your customer's got to feel safe. And it's not about just leasing space. So what we're seeing is, for example, I was with a developer a couple of weeks ago, big indoor mall developer in the country, and they had great success in working with medical ambulatory care or pediatric clinics where mom and child are coming into that store, and all of a sudden they've got time before and they've got time afterwards. That's a synergistic use. The same thing can happen with multifamily that will address the demographic that's commensurate with that area. So you're bringing in that customer. What you don't want to do is to have something that's going to be distracting to your customer. Otherwise, the rest of your tenancy is going to be impacted. And in a lot of cases, there's cohabitation rights, whereas if certain changes like that occur, other tenants can get out of the lease. So there's got to be real thoughtfulness around what is that mix. And the most successful we've seen has been the medical office, has been residential and hospitality. Those have been the most successful that we've seen that do create synergy. I think, the idea of fulfillment or distribution or things like that, I think you got to be careful with, because you're not bringing in a customer, you're turning them into a warehouse. So I think it could work. And certainly if there are companies that do that and then want to offer some sort of a retail offering, I think they've just got to be thoughtful in the way that they're presenting their case to that larger entity of the mall. By the way, the same thing happens in buildings. The tenants to get a really high-end creative tenant that would be in the content development business or the tech business or the social networking business or the gaming business, that impacts who else comes into that building. And so that's actually really important. It's not as dramatic as the retail piece, but it is still really important to the DNA and to the success, the financeability, the value of that building.
Okay, great. One last question on the business climate in California, Southern California in particular. You've discussed the business climate in your blog, and I recommend to all our audience members subscribe to Lew's blog. It's informative and illuminating. You mentioned there, citing the Tax Foundation, California ranks third to last for the state's business climate, and it's estimated that 10,000 businesses have left California between 2008 and 2016. CBRE even announced during its earnings call a couple of weeks ago that it was moving its downtown Los Angeles headquarters to Dallas. So can you comment a little bit on the business environment? You've been at CBRE now over 30 years, so you know the business climate better than anyone.
Sure. Well, let me correct you on the move. We're not moving our headquarters. We're actually redesignating our headquarters. We've been acting with our headquarters really in Dallas for the last 8 years. Our CEO, our CFO, our COO, the majority of our corporate team, actually all our corporate team is located in Dallas and has been for quite some time. Dallas or Texas didn't give us any kind of incentive. There was no employee that moved. There was no job loss here. We're completely operational in the same way we have been. So it's not a case where there goes another company moving out of California. That's not, I know that a lot of the press tried to pick up on that. That's not what happened here. I would say though, in the business climate, I was really pleasantly surprised with the outcome of the state election relative to the initiatives that were on the ballot. This Prop 15 would have been, in my view, a disaster. To take an industry and kick it while it's down through COVID. I mean, I think everybody wants to tax the big owner of an office building or a retail building, but the truth is that most of the small businesses have small landlords, have regional banks. So the idea around that proposition was to reassess to pull that out of Prop 13, reassess all of those states. All of those sites, which literally would have been passed right through to the tenant, and the tenant would have gone, in a lot of cases, out of business. They would not have been able to take that kind of financial hit, particularly now. It also would have impacted a lot of things that people didn't really realize. It would have impacted I mean, I won't go into the details, but just think about virtually any real estate that's out there that's used, for gatherings or for any kind of business would have been impacted. I mean, the whole idea around Prop 13 is it's reassessed when it's sold. Now, a lot of the large office buildings have been sold over the last 5 years, so there wouldn't have been as much of an impact on some of those. But this whole idea of this constant reassessment would have just increased the occupancy rate for tenants, and that would have forced more people to leave the state, frankly. Also, I think on the Uber law or the independent contractor law, I was very favorably pleased that would have shut down a lot of that business. It just more regulation on that, more cost on that would have had a significant impact. That's why you saw a lot of groups like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers and a lot of those. It would have just reduced that workforce and reduced the services that are available to everyone.
Yeah, and that was Prop 22 and most expensive proposition in California history.
Yeah, and I would also say even with a lot of the pandemic, where the state and the counties and cities were coming out to try to favor the tenant. The tenant's not paying rent means the landlord's not getting the rent. If the landlord's not getting the rent, means the bank's not getting their mortgage. And that you can't. It's an ecosystem. And you can't go fiddle with one piece of the ecosystem and not expect to have ramifications, long-term ramifications, with the balance of it. So we've just got to be I don't think these are things that we can legislate. I think generally in the situation which we went through where tenants were struggling, they would have conversations with their landlord. That landlord doesn't want to lose that tenant. And if the tenant is making no money, generally, there's going to be an informed conversation, and there will be two like-minded people that have a common interest will be able to make a deal in most cases. And there's always exceptions, but in most cases, that would be the case. Or certainly for those that can't afford the rent, they would pitch that to their landlord, and that would be the case. I think we've got to be really careful in this state, and I think this idea of, California has got a very high state tax. We've got, in the city of Los Angeles, we've got a gross receipts tax. I think we've got, we've certainly got the federal tax more than likely is going to go up at the income tax level. You can't do anything about that, but certainly corporate taxes, I think, I think we've got to be just more thoughtful on how that impacts the end consumer and how that impacts a company's interest in locating. There are at least a dozen states that have got full-time staffs in LA calling on businesses that are here to move them to places like Arizona or Utah or Idaho or Texas. Full-time. They're calling on Tim's. They're calling on the occupiers that are headquartered in Los Angeles. And what's keeping those businesses here generally is the access to this high-quality employment base. But there are many firms that are leaving. And if it becomes so expensive, and it's not just the expense, but if it becomes so expensive to work here, I think we're going to see a much more of a material impact. I think it also comes out in other areas too, that like in certain parts of our community, we've got a homeless situation, which is just out of control. If a company doesn't feel safe occupying in that space, or if they don't feel that their employees are safe getting to that office, they're going to move. They're going to move. And we have a situation now in certain parts of Los Angeles where there are 3 to 5 fires a day that are generally started on contiguous buildings to encampments. There's diseases now that we haven't seen in decades that are now that are impacting businesses. There are insurance areas which cannot be insured because of the frequency of incidents. And then there's just the overall safety issues. You've got 3 to 5 people a day dying in the streets. So I think the areas where we can legislate are going to be, or at least have an impact, is what we do in those areas. And I know we'll get to some of those questions later, but I think environment is critical. It's critical. It's the ecosystem where companies thrive. And I think whether it's the expense of it, or whether it's the safety of it, or whether it's the access to great employees, all of that is part of one single ecosystem, and it's critical that we keep that in balance.
Okay. We'll move over to the questions from our audience members, and we'll stick on the homelessness issue. Registrant asked, with regards to using commercial property as a solution to homelessness, how likely is it? And again, you're passionate about this issue, so why don't you give us your thoughts there?
So it's interesting, Kristen, about probably 4 years ago, I got really into it because I found it fascinating that I would speak to many of my peers in business and about the homelessness issue, and just the fact that we were seeing massive investments going into the arts district, and massive investments and foreign investment going into downtown LA. And I drive through 2nd Street, 3rd Street, 4th Street, and it looked like a war zone. We had 3,000 people there that were, doing it was a very difficult situation. And I just became intrigued, and I wanted to understand the facts. So I met with our politicians, I met with other business leaders. I was amazed at how much disinformation there is on the issue, and how most people will just speak in platitudes and try to blame one group over another. But what I realized is that there wasn't a lot getting done. It was getting worse. And so your question was about commercial properties. I think there's not a person you or I will meet. I can walk out onto the street right now and tap somebody on the shoulder and say, "You want to solve homelessness?" They're all going to say, "You betcha. We all want to solve. We all want to solve. We have a massive problem here. Nobody wants to see it though. They don't want to build it next to them. They don't want it near their house. They don't want it near their business. They don't. So what happens is we raise funds for H and HHH with the county and the city. We've got situations when by the way, everybody wants to blame the politicians at the city or the county or the state level. Truth is, I've been with those politicians. I've worked with them. They'll go into communities and the community goes crazy. They don't want them. So it's a NIMBY issue more than anything. We at CB, we developed a database of 50,000 sites that were excess properties from the federal, state, county, and city government. These, they're not perfect sites, but they're good enough. And in most cases, there's this massive concern around the neighbors coming out in protest. So here's my solution to something like that. So back to your question, are there excess properties within the federal, state, county, and city governments? You betcha. There's lots of them. There's excess physical plant. There's also excess land where we could build temporary, permanent supportive, and or affordable. Here's the issue. You got to get it entitled. And by the way, there's private funding, I think, available. There's certainly federal funding available. There is funding available, but there's two things that have got to happen. You've got to get it entitled, which means you need community acceptance, which is extremely difficult. That's not the fault of the politician. I mean, I've seen all of our politicians face unbelievable adversity with their communities and the people who are voting them in. And then you've got to go out and you've got to get financing, which I think you could get. And then you've got to give a trade to the community. What we're saying now is that we want to build a shelter, temporary or a permanent supportive. But because of the way the laws are written, I can still put my tents and all my stuff in front of those shelters. So what if we were to say to the communities, tell you what, you build your shelter here. I'm going to draw a radius ring of X distance, and we're going to enforce it so it'll be safer for community, because these individuals will be placed inside and will be taken care of. The mentally ill, the drug addicted, the one check away, all of them will figure out ways to house those people. Well, you've got over 60,000 unsheltered people, families in our county every night that are not getting a bed to sleep and are sleeping on the street. It's unacceptable. We live in the most creative and compassionate and innovative city in the world, county in the world, state in the world, and we can't seem to figure this out. It's a frustrating issue on many levels.
Thank you, Lew. Any thoughts, insights on population migration throughout our country? And I know you're not a sociologist, but you do have some good anecdotal evidence, I'm sure, on this issue.
Yeah, I think it just changed. I think what's fascinating is if you speak to these communities that are destination communities that were typically communities where people would go to recreate, in Wyoming or in Utah or in Idaho. Now there are these second homes that have been available in many cases for years and years that have flown off the shelf. You look at neighboring, and what I'm talking about is the workforce now, because in situations in the Bay Area when tech firms say we're not going to open until July, in most cases it is because of the pandemic, but it's also because of schools. It's trying to figure out, how do I put my kids back into school, or and by the way, if I can work from my home, why can't I work from Jackson Hole? Or why can't I work from Boise? And so I think you're going to have a workforce now that has the potential to migrate in some cases. So there will be a dimension there. And then you've got businesses that are being recruited that I think we need to be mindful of. And listen, I think tax rates, I think environment, all those things we talked about previously on your questions, I think are all elements that go into it. Now I've seen a real frustration with citizens in the homeless issue, and a real frustration that they don't see progress there. I also have seen real frustration, and I can tell you right now that if some of those California state initiatives would have passed, there would have been a real anger, I think, with a lot of the business community. I think they didn't. I think it's helpful. And at the end of the day, we also have got a phenomenal community to live in that certainly the weather's wonderful. But again, I go back to, look at Amazon Select. LA made the cut over any other West Coast city. including all of those in California, made the cut on their, well, I think it was cut of the last 20, whatever it was. It wasn't because we had snappy real estate. It was because we had 1 million young people a year graduating from college, feeding that workspace. You can't do that in certain communities that I just mentioned. You can do it here. If you've got an employee need of 50,000 people, we won't even notice. I mean, we've got unbelievable talent that's coming out of university and great universities throughout the state. And I think that's our greatest advantage. But I think we need to work in cooperation with the state and local governments to make sure that we maintain that competitive advantage, because that is our resource. That is our primary resource. It's the talent that lives here, that recreates here, that gets educated here, that wants to live here.
Thanks. That's nice to hear as a professor at USC. We have a question on office parking. We haven't talked about that at all. How will office parking be impacted? If I have 100 parking spaces for my full-time employees, but now have 50 employees coming in Monday and Tuesday, and then a different 50 coming in on Wednesday and Thursday, should my building agree to let employees share spaces? Is there another solution?
Well, in most high-rise buildings, in most cases, there's dedicated parking, but then there's also valet parking. The benefit to valet is certainly the convenience for the employee, but it's also the ability to stack cars. So I think there's a lot of, I mean, I've seen in the Arts District a lot of the double stacking. There's going to be solutions for parking. I don't see that as a real issue. Generally, most parking garages are oversubscribed because not everybody is there at any one given time. I think you'll see that even more so now that there is going to be this dimension, 20, 30%, whatever it is, that'll be working outside of the office space.
Okay. Another question. As an investor in REITs, I'm concerned about the boom-bust risk volatility we are now really able to see. How can your industry smooth out this volatility by using this mixed-use blend?
Well, first of all, if you were in an industrial REIT, last 6 months you did real well, because of all the logistics patterns. If you're in an office REIT, I wouldn't worry. I'd be a buyer right now. The office space isn't going away. I think what's going to happen is for executives like me, I'm studying it right now. I've got a lot of people, my best thinkers on this right now, where I got to figure out how to program my space. So people are more educated, and I'm creating an environment like a retailer would. I've got to almost have my own merchandising plan. I've got to make it interesting in design. I've got to make it healthier. I've got to make it so that people want to be there. I've got to provide technologies that are going to be enhanced that you can't get from home. I've got to now find reasons where my employees really want to be there. And I can dictate whether they're there or not, but that's an unrealistic dictate. I've got to create an environment. When I say I, the royal I, the business executive that's holding their companies together, we have got to create environments now which are going to be attractive to talent. And I think that just enhances that operator relationship with the company. It enhances, or it really, I think, it really supports the importance of the services that are available to that building, the services that are potentially, or the quality of that lobby, the health concerns and the way that building is being operated. Certainly, we're going into space now and try to get more volume even in high rise. We're opening up parts of it just so we can get connectivity between floors other than just an elevator. So I'm a holder or a buyer on office REITs.
Okay. Another question. I know you'll love this question because I know you wanted to talk about it today. Do you have any insight into the logistical warehousing by players like Amazon and Walmart, particularly in the Inland Empire?
Oh, you look at, I think it was 20 years ago. I don't think there was 1 million square foot building built ever. I think, and I'm going to get this directionally accurate, it won't be perfect. I think 10 years ago, there were probably 20. And today, there's probably 50 million square foot buildings. It is this logistics and a business, and the way that we're fortunate to be, completely impacted by the Long Beach port and by the Port of Los Angeles, is massively important, not just to Southern California, but to, 60% of the goods in this country are coming to those ports. That port, that combined Long Beach and LA port. So the logistics discussion around getting that train or truck to the warehouse and then getting it into an infill location so that I can, or my wife ordered picture frames yesterday, got them the same day. It was unbelievable. And I think that's just going to continue to get better. And I think that that those companies that can, and Amazon's a great example. I think there's other companies that have got critical mass, not like Amazon, but certainly Amazon is the highest profile, that can create not only, well, they've created, but then I think you'll start to see them move into other products. I think Amazon's announcement a couple of days ago on pharmaceuticals. You can see there's not a lot of difference between a book and a pill when you're talking about getting it to a customer or a tennis racket. So the retailer has got to create a place that's safe, that's interesting, that's edutaining, that is going to create an environment where I want to go there, I want to take my family, I want to feel safe. I want to spend a couple of places, I want to go to a couple of different locations on that site. On the logistics site, I want to be able to get something either that day or the next day. And if I want to return it, I don't want a big hassle. And by the way, I don't want to pay for it. And that's happening. And so the logistics companies, 3PLs, the third-party logistics companies, certainly the large groups like Amazon and others that are out there that are providing those services are critical. But the industrial market right now, I know we didn't touch on that, but our industrial numbers are ahead of last year's on the capital market side and on the leasing side. And the vacancies in the Southern California marketplace are sub 1%.
Yep. Okay. We've received a few questions on the vaccine. So once a vaccine is readily available, would you expect the market to be a buyer's or a seller's? And do you expect landlords to provide increased incentives?
I don't know that the landlord will get into that business. Maybe there's something I'm not thinking about, but I don't know that the landlord is going to incentivize people to get a vaccine. Listen, I think it's going to be accepted. I think people want this to end. I think in general, I think this is now being tested in other parts of the world. And we've had, the American medical industry is the best in the world. And I feel very confident in that. I do believe that people will embrace it and take it and try to move on, getting back to what we all want to be as normal. So I really think, and by the way, we've always, as a company, we've predicted kind of this V-shaped recovery. The V keeps moving though. But I do think, and you saw it in last week's stock market, you saw, what happened when the announcement from Pfizer and others came out on vaccines, the stock market went crazy. People are ready. They're ready to get back to work. They're ready to get back to a restaurant. They're ready to get back together with their families. They're tired of the politics of who gets to come to Thanksgiving dinner. Or the health concerns or health risks, legitimate. But I think people are ready to get back to normal. So I think you're going to see a big embrace now of that. I think, frankly, what we need more than anything now is easier access to testing. My frustration is that a lot of the metrics that we see on the increased, identified cases is we have a lot more testing going on.
Yeah.
So, and what concerns me, candidly, Kristen, is when I see some of the laws that are coming out of the guidance from the county that are coming out of the state that are coming out dictating, like restrictions in outdoor dining. That's the one place where it seems that most people are following the rules. Your waiter's coming in with a mask. He's got or she has got the screen on there 6 feet apart. People are generally confined. Where this pandemic is really increasing is primarily with families, where people are going out and they're coming back in and then they're infecting the family. And I think we've got to follow the science. Those areas, small businesses or restaurants or places where they actually are following the rules, let's leave those alone. Let's focus on in-house testing. Let's focus on, let's take some lessons out of the book from Asia, and figure out how we can do a better job in just, in getting past this. I just think these broad-based regulations that are trying to solve in some cases, isolated issues may be too draconian for the whole market and really aren't considering parts of the market that need to be considered.
Okay. Again, on the vaccine, assuming the vaccine is successful, how much softening percentage-wise of lease rental rates should we expect, if any?
Well, right now we're not seeing much. I think, I don't, and again, it's really hard to say. I don't know. Right now, what we're seeing is not so much softening. We're just seeing it's slow. We're just not seeing the transactional activity that we're certainly not seeing it in building sales. I mean, the building sales that are taking place right now are 1031 buyers on leases that are either triple net long-term leases or have got credit. But any kind of leasing where there's some sort of occupancy concern or vacancy risk, there's just uncertainty. So nobody's really investing in that, or not many, not nearly what they were over the last several years. And I think for the occupier is not so much concerned about, renewing, which is critical to the business, but what they build when they renew. So once we get this vaccine, does that mean benching is out? Does that mean I've got to put screens behind, separating every employee, or do I have to go back to enclosed office space, or what do I need to do on my air filtration system? I mean, I was at a presentation the other day with a West LA new building coming out of the ground, Lumen, and they spent the first 20 minutes talking about their new carbon filtered air handling systems that ultimately would, create a cleaner environment. So companies are all over this. So I'm not going to put a percentage. I think that percentage more than likely will be short term. I think the office market bounces back, but I think it bounces back with the new kind of idea that there's going to be this need for flexibility, people working from where they want to work at a smaller percentage level. I don't think it's going to be 50%. I think it's going to be, I think there's going to be, most employees are going to want to spend a day or two at home. And I think most employers now trust that they're going to be productive in doing that.
Okay. And perhaps with some design enhancements and new amenities to attract the employees back to the.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think we have time for a couple more questions, more on REITs. But what about REITs which invest in data centers such as digital realty? Is there a strong
on fuego, on fire? Stay with them. I'm a buyer. I mean, right now the data center business is killing, and it will continue to kill it. I'm a buyer in that space.
Okay, just for everyone, Lew is not an investment advisor. He just.
There you go, your risk management again, Kristen. That's good.
Okay. Another question came in. Interesting. Do you see different futures between governmental and private sector office users?
Well, I think that when we fundamentally what we did 8 years ago, what CB did is we shifted over from an assigned office or an assigned desk to what we call free address, which means that when you're not in that seat, somebody else can use it. And now we're going to clean it. We're going to make sure that it's safe for the next recipient. Even 8 years ago, we've been putting ultraviolet wands across keyboards and phone surfaces to make sure that they were free and clear of any kind of bacteria. So we've been doing that for forever. So I think that, to answer your question, do I think that, governments are businesses? I mean, they're going, whether it's federal, state, county, I think you're going to see, part of it is the attraction and retention of those employees. In some cases, in the civil service, it's a little bit different, where you've got other things you've got to deal with, with unions and that sort of thing, where people may have more of a say. I think in the private sector, I think you're going to absolutely see a move towards this free address kind of an idea, because if you're not going to be in that seat, I don't want it sitting there vacant. I want it to be more efficient. Now, I may need more open space like what I've got behind me, or space in between benches. So I'm not sure, and I'm not willing to state yet whether or not that increases or decreases the size of office space. Right now in the layouts that I'm looking at for our own spaces, I'm not sure that it decreases it at all. I think we may need more distance, and I think people, even post-COVID, are going to want to respect more distance between employees. So I think the jury's still out on that. I think that, but we're rushing to the future. I mean, we've got a lot of people working on this right now, and we've got a massive amount of intellect that's looking at this, because we believe that we can be the first one of the first data points out there so that clients can look at us for discovery relative to what they should be doing.
Okay. A question came in. What are your thoughts on the 2040 downtown LA plan and how it will have an effect on commercial properties in the communities surrounding downtown?
I'm not familiar with it. Familiarize me with what the 2040 plan is.
No, it's a question from one of our.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know what it is. So I probably should, but I don't.
Okay. A couple of questions, whether this webinar is recorded, and it is recorded, and there will be a recording. So we got a question, I think, from a USC student. Mr. Horne, thank you for your time. What would be your #1 word of advice for soon-to-be or recent graduates that are interested in getting into commercial real estate in this current environment?
It's a great question. And I've got kids. My youngest daughter just took the bar, and I'm having the same conversations with her. It's difficult to network on Zoom, right? I mean, that I think illustrates just one more phenomenon that's taking place right now. I would say, give me a call. We're always looking for talent. Love SC students. I would say, though, in all seriousness, persistence pays off. When people think of commercial real estate, I'll just speak for our firm. There's a multitude of different swim lanes that make that up. We manage it, we finance it, we lease it, we sell it, we consult around it, we provide incentive packages, we appraise it, we have another group, Trammell Crow organization, and CBRE Global Investors, which they act as principals in terms of building it and investing in it. We've got a corporate group that just focuses on the occupancy of large multinational corporations. So when you say commercial real estate, part of it is getting educated, and we have an intern program. I think we're going to keep it this year. Last year we canceled it, but I think we're going to try to figure out, because we look at our intern program as really an opportunity for us to evaluate, young talent, and also for that young talent to evaluate us, and then have informed conversations relative to what that young talent might be interested in. So I would say certainly check with me, and I'll put you to the right people. And then also it's all about the persistence of pursuing, opportunities. If you quit, and you think, well, somebody didn't return my call, therefore they're not interested, then it's probably not for you. But if you're persistent and you keep coming after it, and I think that attribute is an attribute with whatever you decide to do in life, it's going to be important to your success.
Thank you, Lew. I tell my students to be graciously aggressive towards recruiters, and I think your term of persistence is really spot on. One more thing, you and I were talking a little bit about the alumni network at USC, and I know we have a lot of USC alumni on the phone right now. How important has the USC alumni network been to your career?
Some of my closest friends, my best friends. I mean, you're all people that I went to college with, and I can tell you that there's really no network like USC's network that I'm aware of, particularly in the Western U.S. I mean, there's a network of people here that it's not. I don't think the alumni are competitive with each other. They really are happy when they see their peers and when they see other alumni do well. There's a pride, I think, where that really exists, and I think there's a real sincere, authentic interest in alumni helping other alumni or starting, young professionals coming out of school. I mean, and so I think so highly of it. And I still look back with just great pride on graduating from USC. And I also every chance I can to try to help somebody from the Trojan Network, I do.
Thank you, Lew. Thank you so much, audience, for joining us today. I really appreciate, Lew, your time for spending an hour and 15 minutes with us. You really illuminated, I think, our thinking about